thank everybody for coming to our event today. Our lecture is sponsored by the Tony Neighbor Memorial Fund, the UCB Philosophy Department, and the College of Architecture and Planning. And I would also like to thank our department assistants for helping us put together, dealing with the mechanics of the event, Agnes Romero and Rachel Boyce. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Dr. Albert Borgmann. He is the Regents Professor of Philosophy at the University of Montana. He has done extensive work in all areas of philosophy, spanning from philosophy of language to philosophy of ethics and morality. Perhaps his most influential work, and he's best known for, is his work in the philosophy of culture and values, and in particular the philosophy of technology. And it is indeed today's lecture topic is in this realm. It is entitled What Am I Reading? Personal Identity in the Age of the Internet. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Borgmann.
This lecture is dedicated to the memory of Honey Beaver. She was a member of the philosophy department at the University of Colorado in Denver here. She was a young scholar and a promising one, and she died in her early 30s. And parents are not supposed to have to bury their child, but the Beavers, Millicent and Charlie, acted with fortitude and generosity on this grief. And they endowed this lecture, they endowed the library, the philosophy department here. And although they're not here, you should recognize them just the same. So please join me in saluting the Beavers. I'll talk for about 40 minutes, and then I'll be glad to have your comments and questions. I'll start by pointing out that there are two kinds of dangers to personal identity today. And the second one, difficult to grasp, and I will use history as a backdrop and philosophy as a tool to outline the shape of a kind of identity which is very different from the one that we have today. I will then mark the transition which put an end to that kind of identity and opened up entirely new possibilities. These possibilities have been traced by a sequence of philosophers that I will mention, and they acted constructively on the possibilities that they saw, but leave us with an important problem. I will then turn to the culture of technology and the internet in particular as a kind of solution to the problem that we're left with. But then we're left with a new kind of problem, and I will just gesture in the direction in which we might find a solution to that last problem. The internet has become a field of dragon teeth to a person's identity. Your identity can be spied on by the government, stolen by a criminal, pilloried by your enemy, hounded by a bully, and foolishly exposed by yourself. And these dangers existed before the internet, but the internet has intensified them, and we're not unaware of them. And both government and private agencies are concerned to protect your privacy, although when it comes to a conflict between increasing prosperity and protecting privacy, individuals as well as the government more often side with prosperity than protection of privacy. The other danger is more concealed and more difficult to grasp, as I said. It haunts us and sometimes surfaces in feelings of displacement, distraction, and fragmentation, and often it does so when we, to all appearances, feel energetic and busy and connected. And at the same time, I think the recent developments have also opened up new possibilities of contingency and diversity and new ways of shaping our identity in newly responsible, intricate, and open-minded ways. Let me turn then to a backdrop that tells us of a time in which identity was very different. Prior to the modern period, neither individuals nor communities had a problem of identity. They had a destiny. And the person that I want to talk about briefly as an example of that is Suger of Saint-Denis, who lived in the 12th century and was one of the most influential persons of 12th century France, both culturally and politically. Suger was the son of a minor noble family in France, and he was an oblatus. An oblatus is a kid that's offered to a monastery and destined to become a monk. And Suger, instead of complaining about the lack of self-determination, expressed gratitude to the hand of Providence. And in an autobiographical statement, he says, the church suckled me as a child, held me steady as a stumbling youth, greatly strengthened me as a mature man, and set me among the princes of the church and the realm. And indeed, Suger became the abbot of the most powerful monastery at the time, Saint-Denis, a suburb of Paris, and became the regent. And as I said, for him, identity was not a problem, but something that was given to him by the hand of Providence and that he appreciated. He faced not only the blessings of Providence, but also the challenges of Providence, the challenges of opposition and hostility. His great spiritual opponent was Bernard of Clairvaux, and he very much opposed the splendor and prosperity of Saint-Denis and of the great Gothic church, which really gave us the Gothic style. He was a champion of austerity and simplicity. And although Suger was by far politically more powerful, he did not take his opponent on, but met him with deference and conciliation. He met hostility in the robber barons that pillaged and plundered the villages that were the property of the monastery. And though short of stature and peaceful of disposition, he took up arms and pursued the robber barons until they were defeated. So he had character in the original sense of that word. That is, the shaping, the impressions that you get from the world around you. That world came to an end with the beginning of the modern era. And that beginning of the modern era was both the collapse of the medieval world and the beginning of a new era. It was a collapse in that boundaries were broken and barriers leveled that had heretofore given the medieval world its shape and its limits. And the change from the medieval to the modern world is the great divide in human history. And although the tremors of this earth-shaking development were at first local, they have in time become global and rippled across the planet, although unevenly so. And that great transition is marked politically by the rise of democracy, cognitively by the rise of the sciences, religiously by the Reformation, and then materially through that transformation that I will summarily call technology. The reaction to this newly open world was, as it is still, one of enthusiasm, anxiety, and constructive design. To begin with enthusiasm, there is Francis Bacon. And in talking about these philosophers, you should understand that philosophers are not, as they often like to think of themselves, as the shapers of culture. The conceit is that you have to think it before you can do it. So we philosophers think it, and then the rest of you can do it. Rather, philosophers, if they have a distinction, is that they have an unusual seismographic sensibility, and they pick up on tremors that are still hidden. They pick up on developments that are struggling to be born. They say them out loud. And of course, in articulating them, they do, perhaps to some extent, help what is struggling to be born come to the surface more quickly. So Francis Bacon is the one who greeted the new openness with great enthusiasm, with an aggressive attitude, and he thought of the revolution as being both a testament to the greatness of God, sort of the lip service that philosophers kept paying to the olden times, and a benefit for the improvement of the humanist state. And this was a reaction that followed soon in the early 17th century and the collapse of the Middle Ages. But at almost the same time, there was also this famous expression of anxiety by the poet John Donne, who proclaimed that that everything's in pieces, all coherence gone. So there is Bacon's enthusiasm, Donne's anxiety. And half a century later, we get the first constructive design, which gives us a clue to the way in which we came to think of identity. And the person is the founder of modern philosophy, strictly speaking, René Descartes. And the particular contribution that matters to us here is his invention of the coordinate system and analytic geometry. The coordinate system is the precision and the mathematizing of the grids that have been used informally before. And the Cartesian coordinate system lets us understand reality more penetratingly, but it also gives us a way of identifying ourselves by locating ourselves within a grid. As you know, any point on the Cartesian coordinate system can be defined by a value for x, a value for y. And So it's a numerical identity that is sometimes called weak identity. Your identity is determined by your placement. And then half a century after that, still in the 17th century, we get the alternative version of identity, and it is the one that we all Leibniz. Leibniz famously had the principle of the indiscernibility of identicals. And this fancy expression simply means this. He argued that you will never find two things that are exactly identical. They will differ at least in one respect. And that's sometimes called strong identity. You can distinguish everything from everything else because it has features that no other thing has. And then, a little after the middle of the 18th century, Immanuel Kant combined these two notions of identity, the one that is provided by a coordinate system, and the other that's provided by uniqueness, by arguing that we should join the two in thinking of ourselves as the origin of the coordinate system. Ego est origo. The ego is at the origin of the coordinate system. And that's clearly an ingenious and insightful solution, but of course it carries its own problem. And the problem is, if every one of us is at the center of his or her world and his or her coordinate system, how can all the coordinate systems agree without collision and chaos? And what's interesting is that Kant faced the very same problem in his ethics. The third version of the moral law says, roughly speaking, don't obey any moral law unless you impose it on yourself. That's autonomy, self-determination, in the strongest possible sense. And there again, you have to ask, now I can ask my students, how can that be? If you have your moral system, you have yours, I have mine, how can we be sure that there isn't chaos? And Kant's solution in this case was to distinguish in human beings reason from desire, and to argue that reason in its moral dimension and capacity is what we all share. That's the same in all of us. And therefore, all of us will impose on ourselves the same moral law. And it's one of the great contributions, I think, to human history. It's the notion of human rights. What makes us all equal? That we're all moral agents in the same way. And in particular, we're all the same in that we're equals, that we all have a dignity that cannot be taken from us or can be violated, and that we're all self-determining moral beings. Does that provide a sufficiently strong identity? It does, when these norms that are not negotiable today, although tactically we may have to make concessions at times, and again, their equality, dignity, self-determination, when they're in jeopardy or have to be regained, then the struggle for attaining these moral norms and to make them real, to give a person an identity. And Adam Michnik, who went through the struggle of Poland for self-determination, said, "The struggle for freedom is beautiful, and anyone who has participated in it has felt almost physically how the best in him or her has come to the surface." And today we see it again, right? There's people find their identity in the struggle and in the uprisings and to become heroes. And as heroes, they definitely have an identity. And it's sort of a recovery of the medieval case. The conditions in which you find yourself are so challenging and so definite that in reply, you attain a strong and, in many, many cases, admirable identity. But we all have to hope that the struggle for securing these three moral norms comes to an end. But when the struggle comes to an end, so do its blessings. And once equality and dignity and self-determination are reasonably secure, as they're certainly for Western European countries and certainly for the broad middle class in this country, the question of identity rises again, and it rises just in the way in which I talked about it at the beginning, as the sense that it is in jeopardy, that there is a displacement, a distraction, a scattering that seems to infect the very core of who we are. So Kant has given us a partial solution when it comes to ethics, but it's not a complete solution, and of course it's not a solution for daily life that is not fully informed even when those three norms are secure. There's still questions to be answered, choices to be made, and it depends on those, independently of equality, dignity, and self-determination, whether our lives are good or not, whether they're worthwhile or in some sorrowful way a waste. And so we're back to the problem that Kant left us with, and that is, how do we organize our daily lives in such a way that identity is secured and cooperation is secured at the same time? And this then brings me to the solution that is provided by the culture of technology. So the idea is this: your sovereignty is realized in an obvious and important way when you shop at Walmart and the cart gets filled with the objects of your desires, and nobody's going to tell you what to put in that cart. It's the sovereignty of the customer. When you get into your car, the car is the center of your universe. And taught by Galileo and Einstein, you can think of your car as the steady center of the universe, with the roads obligingly sliding underneath it, and you can sort of summon whatever part of the space you desire to be at. And then, of course, the iPhone is the epitome of your sovereignty. you call up on the iPhone what you like, and nobody can tell you what to call up. And in all three cases, in the case of the supermarket, in the case of transportation, in the case of the iPhone, you have to remember the great diversity of merchandise, of places, of experiences that are yours to choose from with unrestrained sovereignty. So, what's the problem? The first problem, of course, is that this works not by magic, but through technology. And underneath this supreme sovereignty and self-determination is an expansive and sophisticated machinery. So your shopping cart at Walmart is the terminal point of a huge organization that decides what gets on the shelves, where the store is located, where the resources come from. They keep track of what's being bought, and it's on the surface of that machinery that your sovereignty plays itself out. The same is true of transportation. You're at the mercy of the roads, you're at the mercy of the cars, of the filling stations, and the iPhone has, a famously intricate and at the same time impenetrable surface. We all know that technology is not magic, and that there is something underneath that supports it, that needs to be maintained, and that you have to pay your dues to keep the going concern. And although our understanding of the requirements of sustaining it has slackened, and we're now faced with large deficits and a crumbling infrastructure and all the rest, here's my prediction. People will see it, and they will do what's necessary to maintain it. And that's called work. We all understand that you have to work. We want to work. We want to be part of it. Work is greatly unloved. But unemployment is more unloved. It's disastrous, because we're no longer part of that system that rules the culture. So there is a solution, but the solution, of course, comes with a price. And again, we're all familiar with the tensions between the world of labor and the world of leisure, and the conflicting demands that they often impose on us, and then in particular, women, I think, have the worst of it. And one thing that society has been unwilling to do is recognize the burdens of women, especially professional women, and we've been unable to and unwilling to make a contribution to lightening that load. Again, it's a very important problem. It's obvious, but it's not the one that I'm concerned with. What I want to do now is somehow get a handle on the concealed danger to our identity that I signaled at the beginning of my talk. And my suggestion is this. The internet, as I said, and the way in which it comes home to us in the iPhone, is the most advanced, the most refined, and the most telling phase of the technological culture and of the danger to our identity that comes with it. And to begin with my thesis, my claim is that the internet, and more broadly cyberspace, is like a glamorous fog that has settled on all of reality and at the same time condenses locally into sharply defined, colorful, and contextless pictures. And so let me try to make this understandable, persuasive through examples. My point is that this function of cyberspace escapes our usual ways of locating and making sense of the thing. There's a traditional way of talking about, say, the internet, which is located in time, in space, society. So what's the space? Well, the space is the little handheld whatever, and that then ramifies into the server, the fiber cable network, from there into the electricity generation and silicon mines and all the rest. That's where you find it. And the time is, the hours that you spend on it. You don't spend all your hours on the iPhone. Personal relations are still what they always were. There you sit, here I am. And, we go outside, people are walking around, and you still have your family, you have your colleagues, and so forth. And that, I think, is just failing to see this enveloping function and effect that cyberspace has, and that I think is the real danger to our identity. So the point is that the internet is not something in space or in time or among persons, but it transforms our very notion of what space is and what time is and what a person is. And two things you have to understand: it's a tendency. It's not a total and inescapable reality. And then secondly, I'm just giving you examples to prompt your imagination, and those prompts and suggestions, of course, would have to be supported by what social science evidence there is, that this is not just something I thought up and comes down to an anecdote, but that there is broad evidence that something like this is going on. And just assure you that there is such evidence, but I won't rehearse it here. All right then, an example for space. The particular example is a GPS device in your car. So in the olden days, when you had to find a friend somewhere in Denver where you've never been, you'd have to have a map, directions, you might have been given landmarks, and in some minimal way you had to appropriate the space that you were traveling through. And if you failed, you had to stop at a gas station, ask for directions. Well, men of course don't, they just drive and drive. But women do it. And so you get directions, you get a sense roughly for what that region of the city is like. With the GPS device, that all recedes into a pleasant indistinctness. And instead, there is the soothing voice and that colorful screen in your car, and all you have to do is listen to the prompts of this person and look for the clues that you're told to look for, and then, perhaps compare it with the little arrow that's moving through along your screen. That's all there is. And then, whoop, there it is, the house of your friend. Who knew? So it's the indistinctness of space, and then out of it coming forward with this preternatural clarity and distinctness and precision is, when the voice says, "You are a good definition of it." And it was interesting to me when I was taken from the airport to my hotel, because my friend, although he's a programmer, he's a Luddite, he doesn't have a GPS device. And so we did, what people used to do 10 years ago. Look at the map, look for landmarks, try to get a hang of, that part of Denver. We made it. The second example is time. Early in my career, and this anecdote will tell you how early it was, how long ago it was. I was teaching in a building at some distance from the department office. And while I was teaching, the secretary dispatched a student to the classroom, and the student told me, "You have a long distance call." And I said to that student, "Tell him to call me back." And I got a lot of credit from the students I was teaching. And why was that? Because he did not turn back the urgency of the now that was represented by a long distance phone call. They were expensive, it was important when you got one. The caller couldn't always be sure that he or she would get through. So that's why the secretary, sent somebody to call me. And when I rejected the urgency of the now, the students took notice. Imagine what would happen today. Would the urgency of the then and there matter? No. Get an email, just to be sure, a voicemail, and and if I wasn't smart enough to turn off my cell phone, I was speaking, I would open it, decide to take the call or not take the call. I might be texting, I might be twittering, all kinds of things. And the then and there didn't matter. And although we have not entirely escaped the demands of the day and its time, that urgency has been softened. And we can now call up things because they've been recorded, they've been predicted. So if you, any time slice that you're interested in, you can call up and find out, what the president said, what the score was, what the prediction is, and and we now think that the intrusions of time are a bother. They should be eliminated. And sometimes, of course, we feel the burden of the dissolution of the boundaries and structures of time as when work and leisure bleed into one another. You're always on call, depending on the kind of work. Your work is not at a particular place at a particular time. It's anywhere and any time. And you now have to indicate if something happens in real time. Because real time is not an island in disposable anytime time. Finally, in social relations, there are still people, but quite often they dissolve into the indistinctness of just sort of shapes. You have to stay out of the way, while looking at your iPhone. And so there are just these shapes. But then you transform yourself into a shape that has that clarity, precision, color, and contextlessness that is so typical of the function of the internet that concerns me. And so you stylize yourself on your Facebook, on your web page, in your self-descriptions, in the about me's, and so on. And even when you meet a person in real life, there's a certain fuzziness. So when I meet a colleague, at some official function, I reserve judgment on who the guy is. And as soon as I can, get to my computer, Google his name. Is he a rival? Is he as old as he looks? As young as he looks? What has he done? Where's his degree from? Yes. He's fairly young, got his PhD from Princeton, published 3 books, all fell dead one from the press. So is he a rival? Well, to me, he might be, but not really. And then, these facts that I think are important, Princeton PhD, 50, 3 books, exact about the trace. That's it. And again, these very precise facts, without further context, take the place of the real person. So that is the danger. And as you can see, the danger infects ourselves, the sense that we have. And more important, the important lesson that we have to take from Sujet, and that generalizes, I think, across cultures is, and one that, as I said, is once more confirmed in the struggle of the people in Egypt and Libya and Yemen, Bahrain, and elsewhere, is this. And a vigorous identity, an articulate sense of the self, requires a counterpart that is equally articulate and important. Something that is not at your disposal, the way things are at your disposal at Walmart, in your car, on the iPhone, but something that claims you. And are there such things anymore? And I think there are. But the world is never going to be the same as it was at the beginning of the modern era. And of course, the progress of the technological culture is, the front is ragged, right? At certain places, it really presses ahead and is very pronounced. Then in other places, the old problems, the old forces are still at work. Nonetheless, overall, the world from now on will be less hard to the touch and softer to the ear. And it's something we just have to accept. And so the forces that can claim us and give us identity don't come with a force of material necessity, but with the still small voice of a moral prompt. But it's important to recognize that if we follow the moral prompt, reality in its force is restored to us. So let me give as an example for the shift from material necessity to moral prompt, dinner. There was a time when if you wanted to eat, you had to show up at the dinner table. And even if you didn't want to eat, and you did, if you wanted to have communication, if you wanted to talk to someone, if you wanted to have news of what was going on, you had to sit down at the dinner table. And that was just material necessity. It was nowhere else to be had. But today, that's not the case. You can eat anywhere at any time, and you can communicate at any time and anywhere. And so the dinner table is no longer something that you just better show up at, but something that has this invitation as a place of quiet, of collecting your wits, of being with others, of tapping into traditions of eating and of preparing food. And as I said, the prompt is subtle, but it's there. And once you show up at the dinner table, by good fortune, or better yet, by insight and an established practice, the richness of the material reality comes back to you. And so this is what we have to learn, to recognize that the things that can give us an identity are things that you have to listen for and listen to carefully. And there's one more thing that is very important and very different from how life used to be. Sujet's life was ruled by destiny in the secular key, by providence in the religious key. We don't have a destiny like that. We have diversity. We don't have an ancestry like Sujet. We're not born into a religion like Sujet. There are not, traditional and inevitable ways of cooking, of eating, of speaking, and perhaps saying grace. We're all exposed to a great deal of diversity already in our ancestry. But I think the wonderful diversity of ancestry that is just spreading through the culture and is a wonderful thing can sort of stand as the challenge and the goal of what we have to be. No matter how diverse a person's ancestry, there is one person, right? All the stuff comes together in that one person. And so the task that we face is not to escape diversity and to be nostalgic for destiny and only wish, that we wouldn't have to make these decisions, we wouldn't have to do the work of fusing things together. We should embrace it. But, of course, we have to be careful not to let diversity decay into diversion. We have to listen to those voices and then pull them together into a coherent kind of life. And as I said, it will give us an identity which is very different from that of Sujet. It'll be less ordained, more searching, but also more responsible, less focused, more complicated, but also more intricate, less solid, more vulnerable, but also more open-minded. So now, glad to have your comments and questions. Thank you. Come on. Yes, Robert.
So I have a question I wanted to share with you. An experience I had recently where my 7-year-old son asked me what Christianity is, and I was struggling to say it in a nutshell, tell him striking to me is how, for him, there is this issue of diversity that I did not experience growing up. Diversity of religious beliefs, the possibility of different gods, traditions different from homegrown. So I was really interested in that part of your paper where you raised just at the end the issue of diversity, but it comes with the problem of volition. Which tradition am I to choose if I am to choose a tradition that will give me identity, or that will lend to some identity I didn't have before choosing?
Right. That's what I meant by responsible. We have a responsibility that's jaded on that. And that's the responsibility of dealing with diversity, of making decisions. And but I think it's very important to recognize that ultimately you're claimed by something. You don't pick it because you like it. And that's difficult, and especially for youngsters, it often takes a long time. And when you have strong convictions and they wander away and do all kinds of different things, it can be painful. But I think it's important that we learn to listen and then accept what claims us. So I'm a practicing Christian, and so I think what claims Christians is something that's other. Sometimes it's just the culture, right? And people like Johann Sebastian Bach, people they like God, but they like Gothic architecture, people they like God. And, but then, they come to, what was the core of Bach's music, right? I mean, of course it's wonderful music, and, well, remarkable lyrics. But is there more? Why did he pick those lyrics? Why did he write the music just the way he did? So we have to learn to listen. I think that's important. And so, who is Jesus? And when Jesus was asked, "Who is my neighbor?" he did not rise to the challenge and give a definition. He told the story. Right? So I think Jesus comes to a lot of people in the stories, in the parables, and of course the Gospels. And then in the culture. Right? And Christians here are Catholics who are willing to confess. The church is the living body of Christ, we say. It's infused by the Holy Spirit. So all those things, the generosity of a Christian, the music, the hymnody, and all the rest, that's Christ. As far as I'm concerned, I go with Karl Rahner, saying, all good people will be equally saved, right? So that's another interesting question, I think. One thing that Christians have to recognize, and the great Charles Taylor, who I think is the greatest living North American philosopher, has often said, you have to recognize that there are reasonable alternatives to your being a Christian.
Thank you for your talk. I thought it was wonderful. I was thinking about the contextless, very sharp picture of ourselves that exists nowhere, no time, but wherever we choose.
Yeah.
And for example, the ophthalmologist I was looking at the other day on the internet, because all of them seem to be out of town, was he was this guy with a Harvard degree. He was very he had his training at Johns Hopkins. He was just the forefront of his education and his qualifications. And I looked and saw that he graduated, and he was I said, he looks like 70s. What does he do with that hair? And then I looked, and he graduated in the 70s, and his picture was this guy in the 70s. And so then all of a sudden this was a totally different man than I thought that he was, right? Because I was thinking that he had put his, maybe like Gabriel, I just put his webpage together, and it's going to be this guy. Anyway, my worry about this is that my daughter's 15, and her friends, she has, all of her friends have 750,000 friends on Facebook. And they're all best friends. And they're all very intimate, and they're very close, and who they are just regularly changes. So it seems as though this delicate sort of moral prompt that they talk about, and that's necessary for identity, it's even more missing than it was when I was a teenager and we didn't know who we were and what we were doing and all of that. And so these kids seem to be, they have vicious, alienating sort of feuds, and their friends are facades, and I wonder then, how are they supposed to figure out? It's similar to Rob's question, but now it's with respect to that interpersonal sort of relation. How is it that they hear something so delicate and so quiet to call out their identity, when what they're bombarded with and what they take to be their friends are these very clear and very abstractive personalities, like the
It's an interesting issue, and it's one where two things are interesting. One is the social science evidence on that problem, which is in one way reassuring, and in another way troubling. Reassuring to most people, very troubling to me. And it's reassuring in that it turns out that if you have 750 friends, the one that you mostly, almost exclusively talk to are ones that you also know in person. Right? That's the good news. The bad news is that, let me put it this way. It's often said, technology isolates people from one another. No. Say the technophiles to the technophobes. No, we're more connected than ever. We communicate more than ever. What's the problem here? The ambiguity of communication. The communication through a screen. It doesn't matter with whom. It's just very different from face-to-face communication. And I just heard a thing on NPR a couple of days ago about an app where children's books are available on iPad, I think. And Daddy sort of lovingly tells the girl, touch here, touch here. And there are two problems. One is, there are times when he's not going to sit there and coo-coo about his little darling because he's stressed out coming home from work. And he'll say, hey, Joey, here it is. And little Joey will do the tap, 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 and he acts, misty-eyed about children's ability, when they can touch things. But what sort of touching is it? It's touching of a surface. There's nothing else, right? And of course, we have the ability to supply to surfaces recollections and depth and so on, but they don't get enriched. And so, when Dad sits there and reads Dr. Seuss, that's what they talked about, It's just, in one straightforward way, a richer experience. Right? I mean, you can't even code all the experience that happens there. Right? It's infinite. Visual, tactile, a couple of little clues, the playing of the light, the noises of the book, and then also extends into the life of the little girl in a way in which Dr. Seuss on the screen doesn't. Dr. Seuss on the screen disappears into the nowhere of, with unintended irony is now called the cloud. Pure advanced. And, but the book, perhaps it's the book, you know, that is it. My mom read this to me, you know, and it's a little worn, and then it lands on a shelf, and there's a depth that people just ignore. And so with the friendship, to say, oh, she just, you know, communicates with the 10 friends that you have anyway, it's this reduced, and in many ways also disposable way, you know. I don't want to be bothered now, you know. And so you text when you like to text, and you Facebook when you want to Facebook. It's not that, you know, your friend knocks on the door and you have to answer the door. So, but then, you know, going back to your question, how do we, if we're troubled, I'm not sure you are, but I hope I'm not troubled with then what do we do about it? And there are two things. One is we have to recognize that what's happening in this reduction of reality to these contextless but very alluring pictures happens throughout the culture, in everything. You know, it happens with sex, it happens with food, it happens with communication, it happens with information. So we're up against a very broad phenomenon. And then the second thing is, we shouldn't be hesitant and uncertain about it, right? And think, oh, well, you know, am I cheating my little girl if she doesn't have an iPad with Dr. Seuss on it and all their, you know, kindergarten friends have one? And she'd say, no, she's better off, right? And, or with a dinner, family dinner, right? Am I just being sort of nostalgic and romantic and worse, aggressive by saying, you show up at the dinner table, you don't eat? No, it's a very important thing. And so we both have to be more insightful against what we're up against and more confident of the things we know to be good. Is there a question? There, yes.
It's mostly on what you just said, and this was the part of your paper that I really enjoyed. The part on food, and sitting down and,
Yes.
and eating.
Yeah.
And just with modern technologies, and you know, my biggest concern is you know, the microwave.
Yeah.
Growing up through high school, when I first got my car and job, like I hardly saw my parents because I would just eat. I'd microwave, you know, leftovers or go and get food when I was out, and it kind of broke down this sort of that relationship that you spoke of. But I mean, I guess my question is, how fundamental would, you know, the process of even going back further than just cooking, but maybe gardening your own food with your family, gardening and cooking and kind of cultivating your food. How much have we lost culturally, you know, from this being able to just drive through the McDonald's window and get it and drive down the road, stuff in your face. It just seems.
It's a very helpful question, and the important thing is to see it's not an all or nothing affair. And one way of seeing what the hope is this. You can think of what's happening to the culture, you can look at it under the heading of commodification. Commodification in the sense in which I mean it is the detachment of things from their context. Then we get these contextless things. And the important and hopeful thing is that context can be thicker or thinner. And if you can just thicken the context a little, reweave it in part, then we should do that. And not say, oh, it's not as thick as it should be. You know, I'm not going into my garden where I've grown the vegetables, you know, and then back into the yard where I have my chickens and collect the eggs, and I'm not doing it from scratch, you know, so forget it. But rather, instead of just having something, picking something up, like, you know, if you're poor, it's McDonald's. If you're rich, it's the seamless web, right, where a gourmet meal appears at your doorstep within guaranteed 20 minutes. That's sort of the one extreme. But then, if you just stop on the way and pick up a few things, and perhaps it's canned stuff, right? And then you and your beloved, you know, warm it and perhaps, you know, modify it a little with whatever, spices, or whatever you like, and then sit down and eat it together. That's a great thing. And then on weekends, perhaps you should cook from scratch, you know, make the context even thicker. And I'm sure you have farmers markets around here. So it gets even thicker, right? And then if you're lucky to live out someplace and you can grow your vegetables, better still. But don't despair if you can't go all the way. And that applies to many, many realms. That's reweaving the context of engagement. So, I've tried your patience long enough. Thank you so much.